You ready?
VR League. Yeah, I'm ready.
There's a VR League?
Yeah, they're streaming live on the main stage on Twitch or whatever. Kicks off Season 3 with exhibition matches of Onward and Echo Combat. The VR League is the world's first and biggest VR esports league. Without over, it looks like $250 in prizing. Could be $250,000, but they forgot a zero.
Wow. That is what happens when you stream at 9 a.m. in the morning, just like us. And welcome to the Hungover Podcast, episode 100. We made it, Yvonne. You know,
holy crap.
Not many podcasts make it to 100 episodes. They usually, based off of the sheer amount of podcasts out there on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play, sometimes on YouTube, and possibly on Twitch.tv. But we're coming to you everywhere. And I'll tell you, as I was saying, not many podcasts make it to 100. A lot of people just give up. But I'll tell you, here at Hungover Gaming, we don't give up. We have 86 subscribers now, and we're going to 100.
We're steadily marching
We
forward.
are going to 100. I cannot wait for the day. Tell your friends, tell your grandma, tell your mother, please subscribe to the Hungover Gaming YouTube channel, because you could get us to the top.
And you could see us every week.
Yeah,
like
then,
you might be doing right now on Twitch or YouTube. But you could see us on YouTube more guaranteed by clicking the bell button and subscribing to the YouTube channel. You could also find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play, Julien. Yes.
And you would influence Yvonne to actually make YouTube videos if there were more subscribers. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely true.
So if you want Yvonne to make more YouTube videos, then get people to subscribe to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I've been interested in. I want to learn a little bit more about what it means to be Russian. What is intrinsically Russian. I want to learn, like, what are the things that Russian people think of as, like, intrinsically Russian. Americans typically think of, like hot dogs, baseball, these types of things. When you think of, the stereotypical American, the American dream, you've got the white picket fence out there. You got to go do all these things. You have 2.5 children, that type of thing. I just want to know, what's the Russian version of that? I'm curious, because I honestly think that a lot of in America we probably have our assumptions of what Russians do on a day-to-day basis. It might be from YouTube, it might be from various media things, and I just want the first-hand experience. So that's why I wanted to talk about that with you, Yvonne, an actual Russian person. Anyways, but before we get to that, we always start our podcast out by asking each other, what media have you been consuming, and what did you drink last night? Me? I could start off if you want.
Yeah. Because you start off, because I always start and then you cut me off and then you go way long.
It's true. I'm pretty hungover right now. It's the Hungover Podcast.
No wonder you look so tired this morning. I thought it was just I made you get up early.
No, dude, I had no problem getting up at 9 a.m. unless it's when I'm hungover.
Weren't you just streaming at home yesterday?
I streamed at home yesterday for sure, but in the middle of the day. So I've been streaming on Saturdays in the middle of the day now, which makes my Saturday evening free, which makes me much happier.
Good.
But yeah, this is like birthday season for me and my friends. For some reason, I have, let me see, 3 other friends and then me all have birthdays like consecutively, week after week. during this time period from the end of February to early March, and it's like actually taking a toll on my life now. I didn't know. I didn't know I had so many friends, and they actually wanted me to come to their birthdays. Last night it was my friend's birthday, and we went to a German beer place. I don't know, where they had German food and German beer.
Did you get Das Boot? Did he get Das Boot?
Dude, this guy at our table did get the boot, which is if you don't know, is a boot-shaped glass that can hold 2 liters of beer, and he finished it. I'll give him that. But
I finished it in 30 minutes when I did it.
No, he basically did the same thing, but he ordered it. It took him an hour to finish it, but of the time he was drinking, it was like, no, it took him like 2 hours to finish it. But he was only drinking it for 30 minutes, essentially. I don't know why he had it there for so long. I'm like, dude, you have to finish this, or else it's gonna be like Edward 40 Hands on the second 40. You know how warm that shit gets, dude. It's gonna get nasty.
I don't.
You don't. I know you don't.
When I played, the only time I have ever played Edward 40 Hands,
and the only time I have too.
I finished mine in like 20 minutes and lit a fire while I had them both attached to my hands.
We should have filmed that. If only we were YouTube oriented, we would have been YouTube stars there. Who the fuck lights a fire while playing Edward 40 Hands? That would have gone viral. Anyways, we
not recommended. Don't do that at home. No, I'm a professional, kids.
Yeah, I'm sure you are a professional, Yvonne. So I drink a lot of German beer. I had a couple Pilsners, Einbecker. There was a sour beer that they had, which I was impressed that Germans would make a sour beer. I don't know why I'm impressed with that. I'm just saying things at this point. But the sour beer was pretty good. Had raspberry flavors in there. Yeah, it wasn't bad. I can't remember the name of it though, unfortunately. I had too many of them. Then we went to this bar. We loved this bar called Pacific Standard. We looked it up. We were like, oh yeah, it's so close. And we looked it up on Google, but it said permanently closed.
Oh no.
And so we were devastated because it's actually one of our favorite bars. So we were like, oh no, shut the fuck up, Google. We have to go check it out. There's no way it's actually closed. That place is so good. And it was actually open, but which was surprising. And so
was Google trying to trick you?
No. We had a beer there. We hung out with the bartender, and he was telling us. We asked him about it, and he was telling us that yes, the bar is closing. The official closing date is March 15th, but they've been closing for like almost like half a year at this point. So the just like internal like problems and shit like with management, and they've pushed the date back essentially many times, and he's really pissed off about it. But he gave us a free round because he doesn't care anymore. He's so done with the job. But so I gave him like a big tip, I guess. But yeah, anyways, nice. That was like at 1:30, and then I just went home. Luckily, the D train came on time. It was like I got to the station, and it was 1:30, and the D train came. I was so surprised. But yeah, so I did that. I've been playing a lot of Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition on the Nintendo Switch. Let me tell you, that game is great. It's a super big nerdy JRPG. If you're looking for a good one on the Switch, I highly suggest this one. It has a pretty good story, and the combat is really cool. It's real-time action. I like it. But yeah, that's about it for me. Yvonne, how about you? What have you been up to?
I have been watching... I think I've watched at least one map from every Overwatch League match so far.
That's pretty cool.
We used to have an Overwatch League esports show.
Tell us in the comment section below if you want us to bring it back in time for what's it? Stage 2. We could do it.
Yeah. I was just thinking that maybe we do like a stage recap instead of like a
just
daily
one.
or a weekly show.
Yeah,
Just
that's
one.
a good idea.
Because just the way that the whole thing is structured, it's really unbalanced. Overwatch League is super interesting because they brought in so many more teams this year.
Yeah.
And teams don't play an even number of matches week to week.
It is weird.
You can choose to either play 2 or 1, and sometimes you have just a bye completely. Mm-hmm. So, like, let's say Dallas Fuel, the first 2 or 3 weeks, I think they played 2 matches each.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to play 1 match each, and then the opening week of Stage 2, they have a bye.
Oh,
that's how they structured it. And then going in deeper, and, like,
Why
I haven't
don't they just make the season longer? So they can fit more games in.
Well, they cut the number of games total that each team plays significantly, but the number of games overall is significantly more. It's a crazy schedule, and if you're tuning in to watch, I don't think it's possible. Like, if you think about the NBA and like larger scale teams, so like the NBA or the NHL or Major League Baseball, right? They have a whole ton of games, but they're broken up throughout the week.
Okay.
Like, throughout the week, you will be able to see several teams play. Some nights, teams play back-to-back, so they play on Tuesday and Wednesday and things like that. So that's not uncommon to happen in other leagues. Whereas in football, every team basically plays on Sunday, other than like 3 games that are played on Thursday and Monday and Sunday night, right? So mostly during the day.
Yeah.
So in Overwatch League is kind of a mixture more towards the football version of things, right? So games are played on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And
Thursday.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, sorry.
Yeah.
And so there's just a ton of games being played every day. Like on Thursday there's 4, on Friday I think there's 4, on Saturday and Sunday there's more.
Yeah, you have to block out your entire day to watch it all. It's crazy.
Yeah, whereas previously I could throw it on, and if I wasn't actively watching, I could go back and cover every single map that I wanted to, and basically like 2 hours every week. I can't do that this time. Exactly. And for people who are even busier than I am, like Julian's finishing his PhD, there's no way that you can watch it analytically and get through it.
I am lucky if I get to watch one match. I like it. It's fun it's so fun to watch the games because I mean it's obviously being played at the highest level, and the game allows for incredibly cool strategies to be pulled off, and you know there's this meta that's going on in the game where you play with 3 tanks and 3 healers, and
goats.
It's called goats. Mostly every team is adopted it in some way, for it's just the way the characters work currently in the current patch of the game that aids for this strategy to be really powerful. And it's really interesting to see how other teams have countered it in some ways, because their goats is not as powerful as the other team's goats, so they have to figure out some way to win. And it's really cool to see the unit move in goats. I think it's really cool to see like NYXL play goats. They do it really efficiently. If you look at their record, they haven't lost a game yet.
They're so big-brained.
They're so good.
Oh my god!
Exactly. Yeah.
Like there was a moment that so I was watching Dante and Super, who are 2 Overwatch League players. They're going back and analyzing the Houston Outlaws versus, because Dante now plays for the Houston Outlaws.
Yeah.
Used to play for the SF Shock.
Mm-hmm.
So they're friends from being previous teammates. They were watching it together, and it was the NYXL versus the Houston Outlaws. There's a character called Lucio who can put shields onto his entire team with his ultimate ability, but if you block line of sight or block with a shield to any of your teammates or the opposition's teammates, they don't get the shield.
Right.
So as this character is doing the break it down, putting the shields on, the NYXL tank with his huge shield knows where the Lucio is, knows where the main tank of the Houston Outlaws is, and puts his shield up in such a way that it blocks the shield from getting onto the main tank, so that they're able to just destroy them.
So cool.
It's so big-brained.
Yeah.
The way that NYXL plays, it's just like, not only are they mechanically gifted, but their game sense and just an ability to communicate and play together is, I think it's unbeatable if
for this season, yeah.
If they play together and play well. Like,
yeah.
They have a set lineup right now, which is pretty strong, and has, like, they don't have to bring in Pine or Sabiolbi because those guys are specialists on heroes that are less ability focused and more like just mechanically focused. They're mechanical gods. Like Pine is amazing.
Yeah.
But you can't play Pine that well in a 3v3 meta because he is
there's so many shields. Yeah.
Not only that, but he's super aggressive. So even if you've tried to play him onto one of the tanks or anything, he wouldn't be as coordinated, I don't think. Just because he's always looking to gain the advantage for his team at the cost of, like, if he can get a 2-for-1, that's good for Pine.
Yes.
Right?
And it's good for the team, obviously. But
right.
When he succeeds, it's good for his team, but more often than not, he has to spend a long time, or he will have to spend a long time to get that 2-for-1 in this current meta, for sure.
Which is why this meta is much more difficult to watch. It's not like you're not looking for picks. It's basically these huge teamfight brawls where abilities are just being popped off left and right.
It's out
and
of
you
control
can't really,
on Anubis.
It's
crazy.
Too fast, and you can't really pay attention, and you have to like slow it down and watch it and replay and see like, okay, this is where this person messed up their positioning by like a quarter of a second.
Yeah, no, and what I mean, sorry to go on this tangent. We should probably move on, but unless we want to do the Overwatch podcast. But watching NYXL specifically, they know exactly when to move back as a team, regroup, even in the same fight, and then just move in slowly, and then get that one pick, and then just destroy the team. They know exactly the timing to do that, and it seems like they're so far ahead. And of course, I'm biased. I love NYX, but it just seems like they're so far ahead of every other team. When they play them, it's out of control. Anyways, but
so yes, we'll move on. Yeah. Just you can obviously see that Julien and I have a lot to talk about in terms of watching our favorite game played, or my favorite game played at the highest level. Favorite game, yeah. It's fun. So other than that, I actually have a new game that I played, Julien. Nice. No, it's not Apex Legends. I still haven't played a round of Apex Legends. I got a XCOM clone.
Oh, cool.
Basically called Phantom Doctrine. Mm-hmm. And I think it was released by some Polish developers. But essentially you play as either CIA, KGB, or the Israeli intelligence service Mossad in the 1980s. And
Whoa.
You're like...
Okay.
So it's in the height of the Cold War, and you're the super secret organization trying to fight against what will develop into a global conspiracy.
Is this a new game or?
It came out in 2018.
I've never heard of this game. That's cool. It's some nerdy PC game, huh?
Yeah, it's got like a 70% on Metacritic.
That's good.
So it's. I think the reviews did pretty well. In general, Phantom Doctrine is not as good as XCOM, but it still scratches at the itch. So if you played the crap out of XCOM and you're done with that game, then a different version of it, it's pretty enticing. So what the thing that pissed you off in XCOM is like you're standing next to an opponent. There's an 80% chance that you hit the opponent, and then you miss the opponent. So in this game, there's basically almost no way that you can miss. You can dodge, a character can dodge a bullet, but usually they'll either take full damage or partial damage, so they'll get grazed. So there's no way to completely prevent damage unless you can dodge out of the way, but that requires a special ability.
All right.
Most characters will just take full or partial damage. And then the more you get hurt, the more damage you'll take from further actions down the line.
I see.
And then you're building out your base, you're building out your individual team. Some of your team can turn out to be agents for the other side. So you can interrogate them using MK Ultra.
Whoa, that's badass.
Yeah, it's a really interesting game. It has a bunch of layers. I just finished the first chapter, and obviously I super built out my team beyond what it needed to be in the first chapter. So going into the second chapter, I feel really prepared.
That's awesome.
And still, I feel like I'm a little behind.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those games like XCOM where if you delay too much, you always feel like you're behind the 8-ball.
I see.
So it's good in that way, and I've enjoyed playing my KGB agent, codename Kodiak.
Oh, God. That's
I made him look
funny.
like
you can make
a
your
slick
own
back
character.
hair version of me with a tracksuit, because he's a KGB agent in the 80s. So he's got fingerless gloves, and he's just in this tracksuit.
That's hilarious.
I am just saying it would be an okay or really fun drug play.
That's funny. All right. Well, I mean, I'm down to watch or play it. I'm sure it's got to be a good game. I'm actually, that's pretty cool that a game like that can exist in this day and age.
Yeah, it was $20 on Steam. It wasn't bad at all.
Yeah, it seems like a game that can fly under the radar. That's, I mean, obviously, it came
pretty
out in
highly rated,
2018.
70%
highly
of
rated,
Metacritic.
a decent game that wasn't an indie game or some like Anthem clone or whatever. Destiny 3. Yeah, that's cool that game exists actually. And
I was really happy to find it, to be honest.
And Steam is the place to do it for now. Anyways.
Creative Forge Games came out with the game, just to highlight the developer. They made a game called Hard West, which is another turn-based tactical game, which I've never played.
Okay.
But it came out onto Switch. It's coming out on March 7th onto Switch.
Oh, nice.
Hard West. Look for that on Switch.
Oh, I've heard of that game. Yeah.
You know what, though?
What?
As I'm playing this KGB agent and I'm fighting for the motherland,
it's like you planned this.
It's hard. It's hard for me to pick any other nationality but Russian when the nationality of Russian is an option. For instance, when back in the day I played like the original Battlefield 1942,
yes.
I always picked the Soviet campaign and played as the Soviets.
I wonder why, Ivan. It's like you were born in the Soviet Union.
It's like I was. So, Julien, what kind of questions do you have about like what it is to be Russian? I mean, to lay the groundwork a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Right now, there's a lot of heat on Russian people, Russian Americans, etc. It feels like a new Cold War era feeling towards Russia, / that the Cold War era feelings never really went away.
I agree.
Just a little brief history about me. If you have, this is our 100th episode, so you might not have tuned in from episode 1 to episode 100. Most of you probably have, or not. Who knows?
We don't know. We have
welcome.
no idea.
The main thing I get to, I was born in the Soviet Union in 1990. Came
barely
over when
born in the Soviet. Yeah.
Barely, but still.
You made it. You're a Soviet baby. Yeah.
And so my parents are scientists and came over to do more science work in the United States.
Right.
And I was growing up as a kind of a dual personality. Like, being Russian is easy enough to mask whether you're Russian or not. Because it's not like being a different ethnicity. Russian people, for the most part, are similar looking to other white peoples. Yeah. I mean, there are Russians that have Asiatic looks to them.
Yeah, it's a gigantic country, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that only white people are Russian. That's not the point. I'm just saying, for me personally, as a Russian, but I'm also white, so it's very easy for me to hide unless you ask me what my name is, in which case my name is Yvonne, and that's not like an Anglo-Saxon name.
Yeah, right. You could say Ivan.
Yeah, and then they know for sure those crazy Ivans, those
Yeah.
Russians. So just by looking at me, you have no idea that I'm foreign. So that was an advantage, but like getting any conversation with me basically gets to the point where like I don't hide the fact that I'm Russian.
Right. I mean, there's no reason to. I don't think.
Yeah.
Although
So
depending on who you're talking to, I guess maybe there's a reason. But,
good point. Robert Mueller, I'm not Russian. I'm American. I'm American citizen. You know this.
Yes, you are.
But growing up, still like post '90s, there was still a lot of fear or confusion about Russia, what Russia was. There were a lot of stories that basically came out about making fun of Russia post the fall of the Soviet Empire. So there's the Russian people went through a terrible crisis.
Yes.
After that. I mean, and that's why a lot of Russians left Russia after the Soviet Union fell. Money was worthless basically for several times during the 90s, etc. And so there was a lot of novelty in being a Russian in America, like, oh, you're Russian, you're a communist, etc. Like, that's all my friends call me that. And then I grew up speaking Russian in the home. My parents tried to get me to read and write Russian. I now read and write it at like a 1st to 2nd grade level.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
It's a completely different alphabet. It's very hard to learn.
Exactly.
And especially when it makes you cry every time you have a lesson. Like, I'm just crying through my tears.
Right.
Like, just reading my little book. But I still have some of it, and I grew up in a very Russian household, so we had Russian cuisine, we spoke Russian, we had a lot of Russian television and culture, so especially when I was younger, this would be a thing, because when you're younger, your cultural influence is kind of half you, half your parents telling you what to like, or something, like your older siblings, so when I was younger, it was a lot of like, you've never heard of this or seen this movie or listened to this, and I was like, no, I'm
Russian.
No. Like, my parents don't watch that, or we don't listen to that, but they don't even know a single actor or director or name of a movie or television show from the Soviet Union. So it's like, I've heard of that, but I've never seen it, you know? But you don't know anything about my culture, which is, I mean, understandable, right? I'm growing up in the USA. I'm not growing up in Russia. So it was a bummer, but I got through it. So in terms of my Russian credentials, that's what it is, dude.
All right.
I'm not fully accepted in Russia as a Russian because I haven't lived there in a long time. But when I got to speak to a lot of Russians when I worked in Turkmenistan, for instance, like, they all can pick out that I haven't been living in Russia. But some of them thought I like left when I was 18. I left Russia when I was 1. So the level at which I speak Russian is actually pretty high compared to what a lot of people would expect. And credit goes to my parents, despite the fact I've cried every time. Thank you, guys.
that alone, I mean, that specific interaction, like if you were to go back to Russia and people can just pick out that you haven't been living in Russia in all your life, that alone is very it's very different from an American experience. Like, if you were to talk to someone here, and you wouldn't be able to pick out at all anything related to how long they've been living in America based off of your daily conversation with them. So, because obviously this is a country of immigrants, people come and go. I don't think that, I guess that's what I'm curious about, that you just brought up, you know, like, people in America don't really care about how long you've been in America. Is that something in Russian culture that's important? Like, it's very important to be nationalistic. I get not that's not the right word, but
so those are two different conversations.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter to Russians that much. Like, there's some pride, I think, in living through the crises in Russia.
Yeah.
And getting through that, and like that was a really difficult time.
Of course.
Really difficult. Like, not the
I've
Great
read
Depression level, but it was really bad.
And your parents, maybe I shouldn't ask, but your parents lived
my
through
parents
that?
are super attached to Russia.
Okay.
Yeah, they find it way more difficult to live in America right now than I think people would be surprised how complex it is for somebody who spent more time living in Russia than living in America, but has been living here for like 20 something years. It's still really difficult to live in this country because, I mean, you grew up, like, imagine being so attached to your country. Like, there's a different level of nationalism. So, getting back, it's also complicated, but so Russia is a very old country compared to the United States.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So Russians don't think about history or nationalism in like the context of a bicentennial, right?
Okay, right.
Russia has been kind of part of Europe and a shield of Europe and the laughingstock of Europe for
You've gone through
generations.
The whole gambit, yeah.
Right. So when the Mongols came to conquer Europe, they conquered Russia first, and Russia took a lot of the brunt of that. And it wasn't like they didn't go much further than Russia. They got into some of like Hungary and Poland area before they stopped. Then you think about Napoleon. Russia saved Europe from being dominated by France. Hitler, the same thing. So Russia thinks about these waves of being the shield of Europe, fighting against the Ottoman Empire, for instance. That was also part of. So weirdly, even though the French and the French fought against the Ottoman Empire, and that's why we have the croissant.
I love croissants. They're so good.
So they beat back the Ottoman Empire in Hungary. And then they made fun of the Muslims that the Ottoman Empire was by eating their religious symbol, the crescent moon. So that's how you get a croissant. So the Russians fought against the Ottoman Empire to get Crimea and a warm water port in the Black Sea. And the Ottomans were then supported by the English and French. So it's just like everybody has been trying to push back Russia because Russia expanded so far eastward. There was such a large country with such a deep reserve of natural resources, etc., that it was, I don't know, they were kind of feared. They were also different because they're Orthodox. So there's the Russian history is kind of like they're a great empire that was never recognized as a great empire. They were ostracized by Western Europe because of the fact that they were in the East. They were a gigantic power. They were attempting to forge this empire through the Eastern expansion and coming into trying to communicate with the West. They were always undervalued and considered uncivilized, despite the fact that Russia has some of the greatest poets, writers, dancers, musicians in the history of the world. And Russians consider themselves to be ostracized because of the fact that they're Orthodox. So Russia's probably the bastion of Orthodoxy, Orthodox Christianity in terms of its stance in Europe. Like, if you think about any other country in Europe that had a chance of, like, remember that we're talking about Russian Empire now, right? So the Russian Orthodox Church is the strongest Orthodox Church outside of Constantinople, and Constantinople keeps getting passed between the Catholics, etc. So Catholics, Muslims through the Ottoman Empire, etc. So Russia felt itself to be the bastion of Orthodox Christianity, and it was a conflict of culture to fight against the Protestants in Europe and the Catholics in Europe and things like that. So For instance, when the Catholics came through on the crusade through Constantinople, they sacked Constantinople because they didn't feel super connected to it. They were still Christians, but they were Orthodox Christians, so they didn't feel super connected to it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always been this slight animosity between the Catholic Christians, Orthodox Christians, and then later Protestants. So Russia being Orthodox is kind of like this really weird connection, and then they speak a completely different language. It's not a Romance language. It's not connected in any kind of way to Western Europe. I mean, there's a link to Greece, but by the time that any of the further empires developed, Greece was looked down upon. It was like... So Russia has always had this feeling of being ostracized by the rest of Western Europe, even though they consider themselves a great empire. And they also felt that they were the bastion of last resort, or like the staunchest defenders when it comes to Europe facing these great foes, right? So the Mongols, Napoleon, Hitler, that's intrinsic into the Russian blood, the Russian DNA. And World War II was experienced on a completely different level in Russia as compared to almost anywhere else in the world. Like 60 million people, citizens of the USSR, died during World War II. Every single family has somebody that touched it. And so, especially when you're talking to Americans who then say, yeah, America won World War II, like growing up and learning that in history books, it's just kind of like, what the fuck are you talking about? You guys didn't experience anything. You joined the war effort in like 1944. What the fuck are you talking about? So there's a lot of that. And then you build from there and you get to the evil empire through Reagan and things like that. And boycotting the Olympics in Moscow in the 1980s. And, there's these like weird random things. Like the Olympics aren't supposed to be a political thing. And then there goes Carter, and he boycotts the Olympics that come to Moscow, and it's just, it's supposed to be the way to forge this bond between citizenry. Like, we can stay outside of politics and just have a bond of citizenry, global citizenry. I think, at least that's the goal of this kind of thing. But because of the way everything's handled, there's this strong nationality that forges everywhere. And It's weird because nationalism is akin to like this line of thinking that can develop into fascism, etc. But
that's why I didn't necessarily want to use that word. But I don't see why it's a bad word, honestly.
Well, there's different through lines, right? Yes. So why did the USSR was so vehemently nationalist? Because the USSR was the only communist power in the world that could fight against the capitalist virus or whatever. So this is through the USSR lens. So the nationalism and the pride that the people took is the pride in themselves, right? The people provided the labor, the force, the political ideology. All of this came through the people, right? Mm-hmm. So the National Union Soviet Socialist Republic, so Soviet is like an advisory board, right? So all of the citizens could participate in advisory boards and create this great nation of coordination and community. That's the basic idea. Now, how it acted in principle is different than the ideology behind it. So this nationalism that developed in the USSR, and that was partially like, we are fighting against the entire world in terms of this ideological expansion. We take pride that everybody should have a job, healthcare, and preventative healthcare, not having to pay for drugs and taking drugs. Everybody goes to the doctor to make sure that it gets screened, that they have physical fitness. Like, these are intrinsic parts of the Soviet doctrine and schooling, etc. So everybody has a job, healthcare, housing. There's equality between men and women. If you look at the composition of Soviet academia, it's like the closest to 50-50 split between men and women that you'll have anywhere in the world. So
that's interesting.
There was a lot of push towards equality and camaraderie and building as a whole nation, peoples together. Cool. So that nationalism is kind of
It's
emergence from
pretty
that. But in the
intrinsic to the Russian experience.
Yeah, but in post-Soviet Russia, this nationalism can be corrupted into this kind of forging of a new national identity, which is kind of what worries me about what Putin's doing, because he's bringing the Orthodox Church into the Russian government. He's trying to form this new Russian political identity, and this identity politics is more akin to the development that could lead to a fascistic stance, even though fascism would be very difficult to enact in Russia because of the legacy of World War II. And that's something that Americans don't quite understand, is like Russians, even if it's fascist in ideology but not by name, Russians will never accept fascism.
Right. And I think Americans, I feel like World War II is not that much, I mean, it's a big deal here. All around the world.
Nearly as big.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, right? The difference between, if you talk to any European, I would say, about World War II and an American about World War II is, it's pretty big, right? Obviously, people in Europe were there through, they have like a deep connection to World War II. It was a really shitty time for everyone in Europe. And America just came in and apparently won the war or whatever. So that's the interesting thing. I wanted to talk about Russia's involvement in European politics. I thought that, like what you were saying, that they seem to believe they've been ostracized, and obviously they were for a long period of time.
Think of what NATO is. NATO is a military and a political organization that is geared against the USSR.
Right, exactly.
And maintained post the fall of the USSR.
Yes.
So there's never been a moment where Russia could be accepted by the Western community, even after the fall of the evil empire.
It's interesting that, Europe just, from an American point of view, from over here, Americans are so isolated from the rest of the world, right? So forgive me if I sound really bigoted when it says it just seems like it's very normalized, most of Europe. It's like, that was the whole point of the European Union. Like, you can travel across borders and there's a lot of trade going on. And so there is that sort of normalization across a lot of European countries. There's a lot of transport of goods and things like that. And it just seems like Russia is so separate from that, at least from my perspective. And I assume you think the same way. It just seems like a separate entity. There's the rest of Europe, and now I guess the United Kingdom, but we don't have to talk about Brexit. But there's like the European Union, and then there's like Russia there. I don't know. It seems like that to me. It just seems like such a different culture from the rest of what I think Europe is. And again, I've been to Europe a couple times, but I haven't been there in a long time. Have you traveled back to Russia recently? No, right?
I haven't been since I turned 18.
Okay,
I'm still a Russian citizen. Ago. And Russia has a mandatory year of military service. Okay. So I was attempting to avoid that, and so I haven't been back. I've finally timed out of the
they won't
time
accept
periods
you anymore.
So I can go and renew my passports and get everything done.
Nice.
And not be drafted.
Okay.
Which is a big positive, because I, despite liking Russia, loving Russia, and definitely, I don't feel strongly about participating in the armed forces of Russia. I'm actually very much against it.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even want to be in the American armed forces, so I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, that I actually considered a lot more than
really?
The Russian military. Yeah,
that's interesting.
I did.
Well, okay, why? That's a good question. Yeah, it's a question.
Why? That's
Yeah. Isn't
drilling
it
down
Russia?
into the political philosophy. I felt that it could well, I thought that the military would be a good way to further have a career choice and be able to push through in a certain career path that I think is well respected and could lend me
Certainly.
discipline and things like that. I have had friends in the past who served in the military and they had pretty good experiences, and I thought that perhaps that would be an option for me. And it was also more of a desperate time where I was freaking out about not being able to do anything for my future and like dropping out of my grad program and just like in moments of fear. And turns out I was too fat to join the military. That's the email that I got back.
Damn.
According to the weight and height that you sent to us, you do not meet our standards.
Damn.
I was just like, I met lots of fatter dudes in the army than that, but whatever. Yeah, I was actually on the verge of trying to get in like a few years back.
Nice. Well, look, I mean, it is definitely a respectable career choice. But, I mean, I don't know much about the Russian army.
I'm really afraid of being in the Russian military. I just think that, I don't know personally what it's like, but
Obviously, yeah,
a lot of the people that I do know who are in Russia have avoided it like the plague. Even those who are Russian citizens and live in Russia. So if you're doing that to avoid military service, then I can't imagine that I would do well, because considering I can barely read and write.
Right.
So
speaking of people you know in Russia, do you still have family that you're in contact in Russia?
So the only people who moved to America are my immediate family.
Yeah,
So
okay.
my sister and my parents. Everybody else is still in Russia, which has been difficult because like my sister and our eldest cousin were very close when they were growing up, and like they got separated, and it's still very hard for them to like sit down and talk about like all the missed time that they could have had if they were together. And for everything that the internet represents, I still don't talk to my Russian family all that much. I do feel super guilty about it. I don't know, it's partially being scared to be, it's really difficult to be, like in America I'm Russian.
Yes.
To Russians, I'm not that Russian.
Yeah, that's interesting.
it's a really scary, anxiety-driving proposition to like talk to Russians and like, make mistakes in how I speak all the time. Because in English, I'm super eloquent. In Russian, I make mistakes as if I was a foreigner.
I see.
So my grammar isn't perfect. Yeah, it's embarrassing to me. And the irony being, the more you speak, the better you get. If I practiced a lot more, I would be better at it. And in fact, that happens when I speak Russian consistently for a month. My fluency jumps out the window. You know, it's just a scary thing to open yourself up to that kind of criticism all the time.
Is it? Yeah, I guess that's something to talk about. Like, is it like a very what's the word? Is it like a very stern culture to talk to? I assume you're talking to people that are older than you. Are you like the youngest person in the family? Maybe not anymore, but
no, I'm actually dead center. I'm dead middle.
Okay. So what's sort of like the social structure there? Like, what kind of level of respect are you giving to someone who's older than you?
It's not super like that, right? Eastern practice. You know, it's not like in Korea when the youngest person serves everybody. Right. But there is a reverence for those who are older than you. Especially those who have gone through like World War II or whatever. Like those are the people who you severely revere. At least from my experience of what my parents have taught me, it's just like if that person has gone through some of the most difficult stages of life that anybody's experienced in the past 100 years, basically. Make sure that you respect them.
Right,
the family unit is super strong in Russian culture.
Yeah, I want to know about that.
Do anything for your family.
Okay.
Family comes first. Even I would say that family comes before country.
Okay.
And it's just, there's this really intrinsic, ingrained love of family and each other, and then you respect your elders, and because of that, if it's you know, you have the difficulty of like, I love my dad. My dad and I fight a lot about a lot of things, from him criticizing how I'm cutting a tomato to like just global politics, and him not respecting the fact that I have degrees in political science. So
That's so
yeah, despite the fact that, you know, I'm like, I am a political scientist. I have degrees in political science. I'm, you know, my dad and I don't buy into this Russian nationalistic dialogue that's come alive, and so we have a lot of disagreements. And despite that, it's just, you do whatever you can for family. That's the number one structure.
So, and is it typical that in
the multi-generational household?
Yeah, I want to know about that. Is that common in Russia? I'm curious.
I'd say yes. There's a lot of interaction between generations. A lot of my cousins, for instance, still live with their parents or have just recently moved.
Okay.
So going into being in the late 20s, but that they also live in Moscow, which is super expensive, so it kind of makes sense. So there are multi-generational households. All of my grandparents are dead at the moment, so
Same here.
haven't really been able to explore that further. But back in the day, like when I was born, my parents lived with my mom's family. So,
oh, okay, that's cool.
That kind of helped my mom to get her PhD when she had 2 kids. You know.
Yeah, no, that's that I can't even imagine how horrible that must have been.
So there's a lot of interaction for multi-generations, not necessarily multi-generational households, but it can exist that way. But there's a lot of going to visit grandparents, etc. And one of the things that's different, so in Russian culture, you have your apartment, and then you have a dacha. So a dacha is kind of like a retreat into nature kind of thing.
Okay.
So you have your house in the city where you work, and then in the summers or when you have weekends, you can go to your dacha and commune with nature. And
that's nice.
A lot more simple. My grandfather built his dacha. It's like a log cabin, basically. With the help, my grandfather built it with my dad and my uncle. It's got running electricity, but not running water, that kind of thing. So you have to pump well water.
Oh, cool.
In order to work. And there's an
outdoors.
electric pump and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's an outhouse. It's not. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot more basic. Like the summer house or the house outside of the city isn't this just smaller version or larger version of the house that you have in the city. It's a different kind of experience, more
That's pretty cool.
Traditional communing with nature, if you can, kind of thing. You have your small garden plot where you grow fruits and veg, and you can take hikes into the woods and things like that. That's what the Dutch is for.
Okay. And I mean, there's so many more things we could talk about. I don't really know.
Hit me with a couple of your biggest ones.
I've always noticed that you really love tea a lot, and I mean, I don't know if that's because you love tea, or is that
no,
like
that's ingrained in
Russian
me. That's a Russian thing.
What?
So
Why
in the
do
Soviet
Russians love
Union,
tea?
there was a time when basically everything shut down between 2 and 3, and it was just tea time in the city.
Really? There was tea time?
Yeah.
I thought that was an English thing.
So the Russians got the practice of tea from Western Europe and from China.
Right, and so
India.
that's actually the most interesting thing. They're pretty much in the middle of the two largest tea cultures in the world. Well, I mean, I guess England and China, I would say. So they have influence from both sides, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I would say Eastern Russia is like they're directly connected to China.
It's
so
China, man.
They have a lot of Chinese immigration over
Yeah.
there, actually. But tea is super important. My family would have black tea, every night after dinner,
Oh my
and
God.
and have dessert with it, and
nice.
just Earl Grey or some sort of strong black tea is part of the Russian culture. I think since my parents have gotten older, they switched off of drinking black tea at night before they go to bed.
Fair enough.
But black tea is still a really important thing.
So
you have it with some sort
you
of
said
dessert.
Earl Grey, and what sort of herbal teas do you guys drink? I guess.
I'm not super
You're not big on
positive what the traditional herbal tea would
In
be.
Russia.
Basically, I just know that we drink strong black tea, some sort of, and generally it tends to be Earl Grey, like a bergamot tea.
I like Earl Grey a lot. So
I couldn't tell you. There are other herbalescent teas. For instance, during World War II, when it was hard to get tea, there was a flower called. So the tea is like Ivan chai. So it's like a purple lavenderish looking flower, and you made tea from that. And it's a horribly disgusting tea, but Russians are so addicted to tea that they had to have tea. And since they couldn't get the black tea itself, they had to make it some other way. So I think that there's nettle tea as well, because we have nettles in Russia.
Okay.
Stinging nettles, which is not common in America, but it burns like a motherfucker. Yeah, it's not fun. It's basically an acid burn on your hands if you touch this.
Fuck that.
It's really, really sucks.
Oh man.
But we'll drink lots of different herbal teas that I can't name off the top of my head, but we grow a lot of berries and things in Russia as well, so we can make like raspberry teas or blackcurrant teas.
I like raspberry
it's
teas.
really popular in Russia also to take a black tea and just dump some jam in there.
Okay.
And sweeten it that way. So you're not necessarily drinking an herbal tea, you're still getting the black tea strength, but you're making it sweeter and berry filled.
That sounds amazing, actually.
This is one of my dad's favorite practices. I hated it since I was a kid. I hate sugar in my teas. Give me the strong bitter stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I just do milk in my tea, but
I couldn't stand milk in my tea forever, and then I finally was okay with it.
Caved, man. It's good. I mean, there are two more things. I don't want to go too long on the podcast, and of course, if you guys
I have to go soon.
And Yvonne has to go. When do you have to go?
In 2 minutes, I need to
go.
Leave.
All right, then we can end the podcast here. If you guys want to hear more about Russian culture, stay tuned to this podcast and tell us.
We haven't even gotten into the food stuff.
That's what I really want to get into, but we can leave that to another day. I wanted to get into that, and I also want to talk about what is it like to be a foreigner in Russia, because I feel like it. Yeah,
I actually don't know that much, because the last time I was there was 2008. Yeah,
so I mean those are things I want to know about. You don't necessarily have to answer them for me, but and not that you like, I don't expect you to answer everything, but I want to know about Russian cuisine, but we can leave that to another day.
Lots of soups,
lots of Jello, and I'm into both of those. All right, I want to know. So we end our podcast every single week in a song and segment called Hungover Radio. This is where you, the listener or viewer, can send in your music to gaminghungover@gmail.com. To this day, we've only ever had one submission, so I'm very disappointed in all of our listeners. That's right. Fuck all of you. No. But if no one picks one, then I get to pick a song, unless Yvonne has one.
I'm all
up.
Good.
All right. I actually really like this song. It's called Dire Dire Docks. It's from Super Mario 64. And I really love this. I love that game. I love that era of gaming, and I like this song. So I hope everyone enjoys the song. Yvonne, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for enlightening me about Russian culture. I want to learn more. So hopefully at some point in the future we can talk more about Russia.
Thanks for making this episode 100, my dude.
Yeah, I think it was a great episode 100.
I didn't even bring up this topic.
All right.
Just so all the viewers know.
Yeah, I know. Actually, that's the funny thing. It would normally be Yvonne is excited to talk about Russia. But anyways, Yvonne's got to go. I've got to go to sleep. I'm very hungover still. No, I'm actually not anymore. And I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.